Welcome to Read Your Comics. Today I'm looking at Heroes for Hope, starring the X-Men. Thanks for joining me today. I've got a jam-packed X-Men book full of creators who have never worked on X-Men before, probably never will again. But before I dive into today's book, I just want to say thanks to all the viewer support. Every like, comment, and subscription is appreciated. So if you're enjoying positive comic content, please consider hitting thumbs up. Comments are always encouraged, and if you haven't already, why not subscribe so you never miss out on any future videos. I created this channel to entertain, inform, and maybe even inspire you to read some comics. If you think that's a good message and other comic fans need that in their feeds, your likes, shares, and subs tell the YouTube algorithm to put it in front of them. Now let's get into this one. This is a pretty unique book. It was the brainchild of Bernie Wrightson and Jim Starlin. In the 1980s or the mid-1980s, there was famine in Ethiopia and many parts of Africa. There was a lot of activism to try to solve that problem or add some relief and stuff. A lot of musicians were in on the act, like We Are the World and So This Is Christmas and things of that nature. And those were all done to fundraise, to donate to charities. And Bernie Wrightson and Jim Starlin, to their credit, they went to Marvel and to DC and got them both on board to do these jam session books. The idea was to get as many creators as possible to donate their work, to do it for free. And most people are only going to do 2 to 3 pages of work, but they do it for free. Marvel donated any profit from it to the charity, and even the distributors went in on it. I don't know if comic shops, I don't know if this one was ever sent to newsstands. I can't recall seeing a newsstand one. It may have, it may not. There was probably some encouragement for retailers to donate to, and possibly even the printer get in on it. I didn't read that the printer, offered up their services for it. But at the end of the day, this supposedly raised $150,000 of 1985 money to relief in Africa for famine. It went to the American Friends Service Committee charity. So I don't know what they do today. I've never heard of them. So, I guess they did some good things back then. I hope they did anyway. But they got money from this, and they got money from DC, which I think their book did okay too. But this is X-Men. Not only is this X-Men, we're going to have Stephen King on this. We're going to have Alan Moore on this. We're going to have George R. Martin on this. Those are some heavy hitter names working on this book, along with regular industry big name talents that we're going to see. So let's go ahead and dive in. Cover by Art Adams. The back cover, I believe, is Jim Starlin on the back cover. So, like I said, Jim Starlin and Bernie Wrightson were the two guys that spearheaded this project. So shout out to both of those guys. So here's our list of all these creators. And I'm just going to read off the names. Let's go through the writers. Stan Lee, Ed Bryant, Louise Simonson, Stephen King, Bill Mantlo, Ed Bryant again, Alan Moore, Ann Nocenti, Harlan Ellison, Chris Claremont, of course, it's an X-Men book, Joe Duffy, Mike Baron, Denny O'Neil, George R. Martin, Bruce Jones, Steve Englehart, Jim Shooter, Mike Grell, and Archie Goodwin. Look at these art teams. I'm going to read them off. Pencil or inker. John Romita Jr., Al Gordon. John Buscema with Klaus Janson. Brent Anderson with Joe Sinnott. John Byrne with Terry Austin on X-Men. Brent Anderson with Dan Green. Bernie Wrightson with Jeff Jones inking. Charles Vess with John J. Muth inking. Brent Anderson again with Tom Palmer. Richard Corbin doing pencils and inks, and he is on the Alan Moore pages. Mike Kaluta with Al Milgrom. Frank Miller with Bill Sienkiewicz. Brian Bolland with P. Craig Russell. John Bolton doing pencils and inks all together. Steve Rude with Carl Potts. Brett Blevins with Al Williamson. Herb Trimpe with Sal Buscema. Gray Morrow doing everything. Paul Galassi with Bob Layton. Alan Weiss with Joe Rubenstein. Jackson Guice with Steve Laiola. and Howard Chaykin with Walt Simonson on inks. Heavy, heavy hitters on this thing. So, story-wise, because you have all these writers, and the story is meant to bring attention to the famine in Africa, it's okay. I'm not going to say this is a groundbreaking story. You definitely see when we get to some of these writers like Stephen King and Alan Moore, they try to do a little something in their couple of pages, but, this is just an awesome book for the jam nature of it, and all of these guys working on one book together. So we start out with Rachel Summers and John Romita Jr. are very clearly John Romita Jr. And she's looking out in front of the mansion, and it's like a wasteland, like a desert all of a sudden. We're in the purple Magneto costume where he was, part of the X-Men for this time period. We just saw that in X-Men 97. His hair wasn't long, though, in this. And she's looking out into what looks like a desert. There's a postman out there. Kitty Pryde is able to be out there somehow, but the rest of them are they're stuck. It's like they can't go out because it's so, hot. And so they go out, Nightcrawler tries to go out, but he's blasted with the heat and then the sense of the feeling of famine, I guess, takes over him, so he teleports back before he can even grab Kitty. And while Colossus volunteers to go out, Wolverine is the one that they say his healing factor and stuff, he'll be able to put up with the heat. But even this face right here at first, if you're just flipping through this and you're just what's going on with Wolverine's face? It's because the famine, this feeling of famine, is taking him over, and it's, it's draining him of his life. They don't really flat out explain how Kitty's able to stay out there. I'm assuming it's because she's using her phasing power to some degree to just kind of beat the heat, which would kind of make sense. But it is doing it to her a little bit. And this was the mailman, and this is what started the whole thing. So Wolverine senses that it's actually the mailman that's causing all of this. And we get the popped claws. He stabs the mailman, which Kitty's what are you doing? But then everything goes back to normal. So now there's this entity basically haunting the X-Mansion at this point. And they feel kind of helpless about it. And as we go through, the first more than half of this book is basically each of them being attacked by this entity almost individually. They go off to, take their turns finding it. Storm is powerless at this point. That's something to keep in mind as well. Let's see. Page 5. Who did this page? Was it page 5? We got Brent Anderson with Joe Sennett on these pages. I like this shot of Wolverine right here. This is the John Byrne pages. We get some Colossus swimming in the pool. Not sure what's happening here. A towel lands on him somehow. And he thinks it's Nightcrawler, and he gets mad when he comes out. They basically have these weird visions and stuff. And the visions are meant to drain them. And the X-Men here are meant to look like they're all steel as well, like Colossus, cold and everything. But it doesn't come across great, I don't think. Weirdness on the coloring there. As I did read this, I found myself just flipping back and forth. Okay, who was on this page? Who was on this page? We're still on some John Byrne. This still looks like John Byrne. You get Colossus without the, metal lines on him. This is Ed Bryant. This is Brent Anderson, which he does a couple of pages, but they're all spread out. The Brent Anderson pages are spread out for some reason. These are the Stephen King pages with Bernie Wrightson and Jeff Jones doing the inks. So this is your one time Stephen King is going to do the X-Men. He'll never do X-Men again. And it's very Stephen King-y. So Kitty, she's feeling hungry. She's got this insatiable need to eat. And she goes to the kitchen, and it doesn't matter what she eats, she still feels just hungry. And this entity shows up that looks like death, touches her, and makes her become skeletal, like she's rotting away. and he's handing her the food. Death is like, here, have some food. This is what you want. But as he hands it to her, the food rots before she can ever get a chance to eat it. All of this is supposed to be calling to the plight in Africa at the time. Some, creepy images by Bernie Wrightson. And we go straight from Bernie Wrightson into, I believe Charles Vess Charles Vess with John J. Muth following it up immediately. And you get this like high fantasy with these figures here, and Nightcrawler kind of thinking about his past. And there's this origin with Nightcrawler, which is probably just revealed around then, where he had to kill his adopted brother or stepbrother at one point. So I can always tell when like a writer that works on the book, on like a comic writer, is on these pages, because it delves a little bit more into their history, like these. Let's see, the Charles Vess pages. Bill Mantlo. So Bill Mantlo is the one working on the Charles Vess pages. But I mean, they look great. They look great. And from Charles Vess, we get another Brent Anderson page, and then we're going to get into the Richard Corbin with Alan Moore script, essentially doing a brief Magneto story. And it is, how many pages? 3 pages long. And it's dense. These 3 pages are dense with Magneto and going through his feelings. You've got the Evil Brotherhood right here. I mean, this has, I can see like Sam Keith's inspiration from Richard Corbin in these pages. The Cerebro is crazy looking. So yeah, Magneto goes to use Cerebro to try to find this entity that they're up against. I mean, look at these. Look at the monsters. I don't think Mr. Sinister was around yet. We got the Blob. I mean, Wolverine looks crazy. There's Callisto. And Magneto's kind of fallen into his, oh, I am the master of magnetism, and everyone should be following me. I should be leading the mutants into prosperity. That's a cool looking Magneto face. I like when his hair is like that too. Almost like Quicksilver's hair. And wrapping it up with, these skeletal figures, which is the suffering of Africa, right? And they're all coming to Magneto for help. And he's thinking, I need to do this. I need to become Magneto once again. And holding his helmet. Or they're bringing him his helmet. That's a cool panel right there. They're holding Magneto's helmet to bring it to him. And the reflection of the face in the side of his helmet. It's pretty awesome. Let's see, who did those pages? So next up is, the Mike Kaluta pages. That's right. So you got Mike Kaluta doing these Rachel Summers pages. And who was the writer? Ann Nocenti. Yeah, it makes sense. Ann Nocenti would know about Rachel's kind of background. So, Alan Moore would probably know enough to do a little Magneto story, but Ann Nocenti would be, she was the editor of X-Men, probably at this time, as well as a writer on other titles. So she's aware of Rachel Summers and her background as a hunter or a dog, whatever they call them, like a dog. Some great Mike Kaluta panels here. Look, I love this one. This whole page, really. These facial expressions. I love the lines on her face. I love all the other versions of herself pulling on her leash. And then you've got these heads coming up, calling her a traitor because she was, a traitor to mutants. Then she gets a Phoenix Force. She wants to be her mother. Here comes Jean Grey, who was back, I believe, 1985. She'd probably just come back. Great Dark Phoenix panels, though, by Mike Kaluta. Look at this one. Whoosh. Now we're in the Frank Miller pages with Bill Sienkiewicz art. Bill Sienkiewicz inks. And this feels like Frank Miller. And I don't think Sienkiewicz tries to put too much of his own flourish on this. Because this seems almost like I could easily mistake this for Klaus inking on this one. Pretty decent Wolverine story. I think Chris Claremont wrote this part. No, Harlan Ellison wrote it. That's right. So Harlan Ellison, science fiction writer, dabbles in comics here and there. I don't know. I guess he would be in touch with what was happening with Wolverine because he does a pretty good job of telling a quick story of Wolverine. He kind of becomes human here. This is the entity doing this to him, obviously. He becomes completely human and has to take on the Wolverine in his human form. And he runs from it. So this isn't the Wolverine we know and love. This is the entity, really just messing with his head. But of course it's Wolverine, so he emerges victorious. So as we wrap up the Frank Miller Wolverine pages, we jump right into Brian Bolland, inked by P. Craig Russell. I mean, when have they worked together before like that? And we get the Storm story. This guy looks a lot like Stan Lee to me. I don't know if that's on purpose or what. Chris Claremont wrote these pages, so you know you're getting a solid little Storm tale here. Look, have you ever seen Storm like that? I know somebody that would like to see her like that. John's Comics with Kids. And like that. And this like ringmaster or whatever is messing with her. And oddly, it actually stays with the Storm story as it goes into the Brian Bolton, or not the John Bolton pages. And John Bolton used to do backup stories of X-Men about this same time in classic X-Men. So Storm's still getting tormented by this clown. She doesn't have powers. Her willpower does kind of take over. She feels like she wants to, have revenge on the clown who's throwing the pies at her. But she ends up seeing all these emaciated faces and stuff and turns and says, "Here, friends, there is enough here for everyone," and decides to feed the pie to everyone else. So she goes to check in on the other X-Men who have all been hit by the entity and how it's just emotionally draining. This is a Steve Rude page. You can tell it's got that Kirby-esque kind of line work to it. And they decide they're going to go to the fight. Somehow they've discovered they need to go to Africa to take this on. On the plane ride, which, let's see, who's doing the art now? Is that Brett Blevins is going to do the next couple pages. Great Wolverine there. On the plane ride, Rogue starts wondering why she hasn't been attacked. Everybody else has been attacked by the entity except her. And she doesn't understand why. When they arrive in Africa, they see all the starving people and these relief planes landing, and they kind of get sidetracked in a way and trying to help. They help unload the cargo and stuff. Wolverine looking like Batman right there. And who did 32? Yeah, so Brett Blevins finished that up. Now we get the Herb Trimpe pages. This is the same level of Herb Trimpe that I saw in the New Universe Spitfire, which would have come out a little after this, I guess. And he does, how many pages does Trimpe do? It's page 35. So he does those two pages, the one before this one and this one. Oh, this was just like an awkward scene. So all the people are coming to the plane to get supplies. This big propeller is turning, and all the people are like walking towards it like, zombies, I guess. And they're worried the plane is taxiing and it doesn't see them, or it can't stop quick enough, or whatever. So Nightcrawler goes over and teleports each one of them away real quick before they, get chopped up by the propeller blade. So here's Colossus and Wolverine doing their thing, and Storm helping feed a malnourished baby. Rogue is doing the same thing, but unfortunately the child dies in her arms. And so she's feeling the anguish of it. And she decides, after all the X-Men go to sleep, she goes and touches each one of them to steal a little bit of their power. She's like, we've forgotten why we're here. We need to take on this entity, which is the one probably causing all of this. She decides to take on a little bit of all of them, and she becomes this amalgamized character. I mean, this is Rogue with a little bit of everybody in her. And she goes to take on the entity, which turns out looking like this monster. And let's see, who do we got left on art now? We're on page 38. So we got Paul Galassi doing these pages. Mike Grell does writing in this, but not any artwork. So the entity takes this form of this like lizard mutation, and Rogue fights it, and then she ends up absorbing some of it and kind of, becomes the entity herself, and Storm shows up powerless to take it on. And this is just kind of the wrap up. You get some cool panels like this. One thing I do like about this book, where the story has its weaknesses, I mean, it's serving a purpose, but all the artists brought their best work for their couple of pages that they did. The other X-Men start showing up to help, and eventually they stop Rogue, who is now the villain, who is now taking the form of the entity. They help her. Rachel Summers comes and is able to drive the entity out of her mind, and somehow that's it. It's pretty unclear. That's how they beat her. And then they decide to get back to work, helping unload these relief planes to, bring food and supplies to the famished people. Got these Howard Chaykin pages. A lot of words here for not much anything else. This is a cool Storm, Punk Storm by Chaykin. And here is Jim Shooter explaining how the project came to be, mentioning Bernie Wrightson and Jim Starlin coming to him to bring the project to light. Pretty cool little book. I run across this quite often. I've seen it in dollar bins. I've also seen it with $10 price tags on it. It's not a hard book to find. I mean, they said it made $150,000 with, all of the profits going to the charity. So that would imply there's at least 100,000 of the copies out there. And DC did this one. Same concept. A lot of the same creators even working on it. All proceeds go to relieve hunger in Africa. I'll look at this one at a different time, but this one was newsstand. So maybe this one did have a newsstand distribution. I don't recall. It's not something I look for. Maybe it did. I can't imagine newsstands that had a returnability pitching in on the proceeds, but who knows? That's all I got for this one. If you don't have it, it's worth getting, because you're not going to get Bernie Wrightson, Alan Moore, Stephen King, George R. Martin working on X-Men. You're just not going to get it. This is the only place you're ever going to get that. So if you don't have this in your collection, I would advise getting it just for that reason alone. Until next time, read your comics.